This is the way. This is the way.
All right, good evening, everybody. Chris here from Fatherly Fandom. And guess what? We're doing another Mandalorian Revisited episode here on Friday. What are we doing today? Book of Boba Fett, Chapter 5, Return of the Mandalorian. So pack your bags as we go into this in-depth review here, getting us ready to go for Mandalorian Season 3, coming out March 1st. So can't wait. We got another one of these coming up next week, next Friday. And then we'll be going live on Wednesdays with every single one of the new episodes of Mandalorian. So it should be a lot of fun. Before we get into it, guys, if you're a fan of our show, please like and follow and subscribe to the channel. It really does help us out and gives us the opportunity to create more content for you. All right, let's get into it. It's the Book of Boba Fett, Chapter 5. It was directed by Bryce Dallas Howard, who directed Chapter 4 of The Mandalorian, Sanctuary, and Chapter 11 titled The Heiress. And I gotta say, guys, each episode that she's done, that she's directed, has gotten better and better than the last one. And this one is by far my favorite of the three that she's done so far. And if they're looking to tap a director for a movie, the next movie for Star Wars, they can look no further than Bryce Dallas Howard. I think she would do a phenomenal job directing Star Wars if given the chance. So she directed this episode and she is absolutely crushing it. The episode was written by Jon Favreau, who penned the entire series of Book of Boba Fett too. And if you guys didn't know, this week he actually got his star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Well deserved for Jon Favreau there. And I could never say enough good things about Jon Favreau. But one thing I love about the man is his attention to detail. And I found out watching the Hollywood Walk of Fame ceremony on Monday that he actually went out with one of the food truck chefs and learned all about the business and everything. He actually learned how to be a chef in order to play the part in the movie Chef. This is the amount of dedication this man has, and he does the same thing for Star Wars. And that is one of the reasons why The Mandalorian was so good. It's because of Jon Favreau right there. So he wrote this episode as well. Did a fantastic job with that. He's really also amazing at listening to the fans, because honestly, he's a fan of this stuff himself. He's a big Star Wars fan, so it's awesome to have somebody like that in charge of this stuff. Absolutely appreciate that. And so let's dive right into the episode, guys. Overall, the tone of this episode and the scale of this episode is definitely set apart from the rest of the series of Book of Boba Fett right off the bat. And I don't know about you guys, but let's be honest, this episode isn't really an episode of Book of Boba Fett. This is an episode of Mandalorian. So I like to call this Mandalorian Season 2.5. And watching this first time, I was completely okay with getting a story set apart from Book of Boba Fett and focusing completely on Din Djarin. So we start the episode off with Din tracking a bounty, a Tatooine mob boss that we get to see here. And my daughter had mentioned while watching the episode that the aliens did look a lot like dogs. And, you know, they do have that reptilian dog-like appearance. And the Klatoonians come from the planet Tatooine is the name of it. It kind of sounds like Tatooine, doesn't it, guys? We actually did get to see them in the first season of The Mandalorian. They were the raiders that we saw in the first episode that Bryce Dallas Howard actually directed called Sanctuary. Those were Klatoons as well. So we see that the Klatoon gang isn't going down without a fight. Din is using the Darksaber in this. He gets to use his Darksaber on hand, which we know from Chapter 16 titled The Rescue was won by defeating Moff Gideon. And if you guys watched the first episode of this series, you know all about that. So I remember thinking Season 3 of The Mandalorian would have to pick up right at the end of Season 2 because, you know, I thought there was going to be some sort of conflict right then and there with Bo-Katan and Din on that cruiser as well about the Darksaber. I thought that there's no way that they could pick it up at any other time. They had to start it off right at that moment. But apparently that's not what we're getting. You know, this obviously takes place after that, after Season 2. And so they must have parted ways as well. And Bo-Katan must have taken the cruiser. Din's on his way to try to find this covert for the Mandalorians, and this is where we pick up in Book of Boba Fett. And I love that we get a sense that the Darksaber here is very difficult to wield for Din, and I love the fact that he slices part of his leg, you know, just showing how deadly these things are if you're not trained. So these things are awfully deadly, like lightsabers, the Darksaber. And if you don't have training, you're really going to hurt yourself. And we see that on full display here. Very real world thing that we get to see with this episode. And I love that detail that we got in there. And so after that really violent battle that we got, Din backs up the Klatooinian's head and delivers it to find out where that Mandalorian hideout is actually at. Now, I gotta say, we've seen a lot of worlds with Star Wars. You know, we've seen a lot of different typographies and things like that, and a lot of different planets, a lot of different technology and other cities and worlds. So it was amazing to get to finally see something completely new, a new environment with this ring world, which clearly has got to be an homage to Halo. If anybody has played Halo out there, it very much looked like the ring world of Halo. And I loved how they played with the light of this. And as Din walked through the city, moving from the dark to the light, we hear a very somber version of the Mandalorian scene play, which obviously makes you feel that the Mandalorian is alone at this point. Everything kind of draws into the fact that this character is absolutely alone. So hats off to the composer of this episode and this series. His name was Joseph Shirley, and Ludwig Göransson, he did come back. He was the composer for the Mandalorian. He did come back and work on the main theme for Book of Boba Fett. He worked on that. But the rest of the score was actually composed by Joseph Shirley, and he actually worked close at hand on The Mandalorian with Ludwig Göransson, and so he did a fantastic job with the series. I love the soundtrack for this, and if you guys haven't heard it, go and check it out on Spotify if you can. They do it in volumes. There's volume 1 and volume 2, and a lot of the melodies and the themes and the compositions from this episode are in volume 2 of that soundtrack. Very beautifully done. Joseph Shirley, he did a fantastic job. So Din learns that the Mandalorian hideout is below the city, and with his visor, he's actually able to track the markings throughout that part of the city to the covert. And I love this element because it shows that, Mandalorians, whether they're scattered throughout the universe, they can find each other and get back together and build up their clans. And they've been doing this for 10,000 years, guys. It's pretty crazy. We finally get to see the Armorer again here, and we haven't actually seen her since season 1 of the finale of The Mandalorian. And she's played once again by Emily Swallow, and I absolutely love her performance. Every time she's on the screen, she just steals the scene and exudes authority too. I love that about the Armorer, and we always get some backstory with her, and every time you see her on screen, it's like, oh, buckle down, we're gonna get a little bit more backstory on Din or the Mandalorians or something, so let's enjoy. And once again, we get that with her. And we also see that Paz Vizsla actually survived as well, the big guy who is voiced, if you guys didn't know, by Jon Favreau himself, who also, during the Clone Wars, he actually voiced the Mandalorian Pre Vizsla in that, who is actually an ancestor of Paz Vizsla as well. Tate Fletcher, I should say, is the actor who plays Paz Vizsla on screen. He does a really good job at portraying Paz. Now, during this, Din reveals that he has the Darksaber, and I love how you can tell in this, just by the slightest movements that they show of Paz Vizsla in the background, how he reacts to this ancient weapon. He's shocked that Din actually has this weapon, which he mentions later on in the episode was forged by his ancestor, Tar Vizsla. So if you don't know about Tar Vizsla, he was the only Mandalorian to ever become a Jedi back in the day. And I think it was 1032 BBY when Tar Vizsla was around, and he forged the Darksaber as a Jedi. Later on, Clan Vizsla stole it back from the Jedi Temple, and the rulers of Mandalore use the Darksaber now as a symbol of leadership for Mandalore. And we find out from the Armorer that whoever wins the Darksaber in combat becomes the rightful leader. So it's really cool. We get a lot of backstory, a lot of lore in this episode, and I absolutely love that. And we learn a little bit more about the Night of 1,000 Tears in this episode, and we learn that Din's clan only survived because they were exiled on the moon of Concordia. Now, the moon of Concordia is a moon off of Mandalore, and so while the planet Mandalore was being bombed, they were safe up on the moon. They were probably able to escape and get scattered through the galaxy. And in Rebels, we see Bo-Katan actually accept the Darksaber from Sabine Wren to unite the clans to fight against the Empire. And obviously, after this episode, we find out that reign, that campaign to fight against the Empire was short-lived, because pretty soon after that, it ends with the Empire laying a massive siege onto Mandalore. And we see these TIE bombers destroy all of Mandalore in this scene, which was beautifully done, beautifully rendered. I love this, and the somber music throughout really does make you feel something for them losing their planet. And we then get a shot of a bunch of Imperial security droids, the same droids as K2SO, played by Alan Tudyk in Rogue One. So that was a nice little callback to that, shooting down kind of the last survivors on the planet as they bombed it. And I don't know about you guys, but this is very reminiscent of the scene in Judgment Day from Terminator 2 Judgment Day. if you've ever seen it. And we got, like I said, we got a ton of lore in this episode, from the armor mentioning that it's foretold that there's a mythosaur that would rise up to herald in a new age of Mandalore, which, if you guys didn't know, the mythosaur was a dragon-like creature that was found on Mandalore thousands of years ago, and it went extinct due to the Mandalorians hunting them all to extinction. Now, one theory that they have out there is that the Mandalorian will ride a mythosaur, and this Mandalorian will become the next Mandalore leader. And some say that Bo-Katan will be wearing a mythosaur scaled armor in the next season of The Mandalorian. This is the rumor that they have out there. Some thought while we were watching Book of Boba Fett that Boba Fett was actually going to become the new leader of Mandalore. But for me, my money has got to be on Din Djarin. I mean, it's got to be. And here's why. I think we have seen throughout the last 2 seasons of The Mandalorian that Din has shown to be the most effective leader. And this is my argument. You guys can fight against me if you want to. This is just my thoughts on this, my opinion. Seeing the last 2 seasons of Mandalorian, he's formed such strong alliances across the galaxy. He's been able to bring groups together that you wouldn't think could be able to work together, such as the town of Mos Pelgo and the Tusken Raiders. And of course, he's rightfully earned the Darksaber as well, twice now after this episode, as he battled Paz Vizsla. And I believe Den will be the Mandalorian that does herald in a new age for Mandalore. He's got the ability to unite all these clans, unite all these different factions together. I would love to see him be leader. But who knows? You know, they might go with Bo-Katan or somebody else, but that's just my theory. I mean, why else is it called The Mandalorian if it's not the story of this main Mandalore becoming the leader? Who knows? Your thoughts on that? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. We get to see Din train a little bit with the armor as they fight each other, and they're actually speaking in the Mandalorian tongue as they do this, which is really cool. And you notice throughout this that his blade noticeably gets heavier as they fight, and the armorer tells him that he's not actually fighting his opponent, he's fighting against the blade instead of his enemy. And to me, this seems like Din has some internal issues going on that he's working with. I mean, he's just lost Grogu. You know, he's dealing with the fact that he did take off his helmet and everything, and he doesn't know his place in the world. He's lost at this point. And the armor tells him persistence without insight will lead to the same outcome, with him struggling with the Darksaber. And this made me think that at some point down the road, we might see Din train with Luke or even Ahsoka, similar to how we saw Sabine Wren train with Kanan in Rebels. I would love to see a scene where Din gets to train with Luke or Ahsoka, or even Ezra if he does come back. That would be really cool to see. What do you guys think? And after that, after he challenged Paz Vizsla and he defeated him, the armorer asked both of them if they removed their helmets. And I gotta say, this is one of my favorite scenes. I absolutely love this. And after some pause, Din admits that he did remove his helmet, which was something I was wondering about whether or not they would bring it up during this episode or bring it up in season 3. I absolutely admired how they handled it, and someone like Din would be so honorable. He'd be honorable enough to admit that, knowing the consequences, he would actually tell the truth. And he was told by the armorer that means that he's no longer a Mandalorian. So big thing there, you know, this has consequences. They were pretty flippant the last season about him taking off his helmet. I'm like, man, they keep showing him take off his helmet. You know, he's supposed to be this honorable guy that's always sticks to the code of the Mandalorian. I didn't like that fact. And I know that, you know, as far as actors go, they want to be seen on screen and whatnot. But I thought that was such a cool element that they had in season 1 of The Mandalorian. And I was hoping that they would follow that on through season 2, that they would never show his face, that this was part of his creed, this is how it was, and they were going to go against convention when it comes to showing the actor's face and keep him under the helmet. But they didn't go that way, and I was like, man, how are they going to get out of this? I mean, what are they going to do? He obviously can't go back to his clan, you know, or else he'll have to deal with this situation. This is what we see in this episode. We see him deal with the consequences of that. So the armorer tells him that he's no longer a Mandalorian, and he begs for forgiveness and everything. This is where we get the basic setup for the main plot of season 3, guys. He asks what he can do to atone for this sin. And Paz on the ground says, "Leave, apostate," which if you didn't know, and I didn't know, maybe I'm stupid or something here, but I didn't know what apostate meant, so I looked it up, and apostate means a person that renounces a religion, belief, or principle, which, you know, they call him an apostate, but obviously this guy is committed to the Mandalorians and everything in that way of life in the code. He removed his helmet for Grogu because he had such a connection with him. Paz tells him to leave, but the armorer tells him, according to the creed, one may only be redeemed in the living waters beneath the mines of Mandalore. So we know that Din is set up on a path for atonement in the next season, and he's got to find the living waters of Mandalore. And he says, you know, all those mines were destroyed on Mandalore, and this is the way. That's what the armorer tells him. This is the way. So now we know that Din has to go to the planet Mandalore and try to atone for his sin. And obviously this is going to happen at some point in the next season. Din gets to leave not only with his armor, so he didn't have to give up his armor, but he also got to leave with the dark side because he rightfully defended his honor and everything. He rightfully earned the Darksaber once again. It doesn't really matter if you're a Mandalorian or not. And fun fact, Darth Maul actually won the Darksaber during the Clone Wars, so he was the leader of Mandalore for a time. So you don't necessarily have to be a Mandalorian or follow the creed in order to carry the Darksaber. So he's able to take it with him, and he boards a commercial flight, which gives us a bit of levity at this point, where he has to check in his multitude of arsenal. I love this, all the whistling birds, the rope, all the guns and everything like that, his vibro blade, and then finally he takes out the Darksaber, which he just defended and had to give it up and put it into this plastoid case that this droid is telling him he has to, which was awesome. I love that. And the droid is actually the same droid that we actually see in the original Star Tours at Disneyland, named Captain Rex, or RX-24. He also appeared in Rebels Season 1, Episode 3, called Droids in Distress, if you didn't know that. But that was a cool little callback there, having that droid and everything. And he's like, I know everything in that case. I love that scene. It was great to get to see that after such a heavy scene previously. And I love in this episode how we get a sense of how much Din is missing Grogu, too, as he looks down at the pouch that he got from the armorer, where they make this thing. We don't know in this episode what it is that was made from the Beskar spear, but we know that she made something for him. She put it into a little cloth and everything. And the cloth very much looks like Grogu's head with the little ears and everything like that. And so we know that he's very attached to this kid. And being apart seems to be very difficult for Din at this point. As a father, that has to be apart from my kids from time to time. I completely understand this. I know the struggle that you feel when you're away from your kids and how much that hurts you. They become such a part of your life that it's hard to be without them. And you get a lot of that from this episode, and I absolutely love that. Fun fact, too, on the set of this episode, Din Djarin's stunt doubles was Brendan Wayne, which is pretty cool, who is in fact John Wayne's grandson, if you didn't know, which to me fits perfectly for a character in a sci-fi western fantasy. Apparently, due to filming of The Last of Us, which Pedro Pascal is actually a part of, Pedro Pascal couldn't be on set for the Book of Boba Fett, so they had to rely completely on the stunt doubles to do the performance of Din Djarin in this. And Pedro came back later on and did all the voice work for it. And I thought they did a fantastic job. Brendan Wayne did a fantastic job as the stand-in for Din Djarin in this. I absolutely love the performance. He did very well with this. We find that Din is going to Tatooine in this because Pelemoto sent him a message, and she has a replacement ship for the Razor Crest ready to go for him. Well, almost ready to go, right, guys? We then get to see, when we go to Tatooine to Pelemoto's hangar, we see a BD droid, which gets attacked by a Womp Rat in Pele's hangar, which if anybody knows or who has played Jedi Fallen Order, you might recognize. This looks very similar to BD-1, but it's been confirmed, and I've looked around, it's been confirmed that this droid is not, in fact, BD-1 himself. It's just a similar type droid from the same series. So this really does give me pause. It makes me think, well, they're spreading these little cookie crumbs. We got the Inquisitorius in Obi-Wan. We got this BD droid in Book of Boba Fett. Maybe they are setting us up for Cal Kestis in this one. Who knows? Maybe we will eventually get Cal Kestis in live action at some point. Peli shows Din a really roughly beaten down Naboo N1 starfighter, and just like my response, Din has the exact same response. He immediately reacts and says, "Give me my money back. This is not what I wanted." I love this, and Peli goes into full car salesman mode, trying to sell him on this starfighter. So I love that. She's like, well, my droid gets your money. Why don't I tell you some of the features of this fine aircraft? So I love that. I thought that was awesome. And I gotta say, I absolutely enjoyed the build sequence of this episode, and the fact that Din was okay with the help from the BD droid and the pit droids, showing how far he's come in this series. And after we get a chromed out modeled N1 starfighter, Din actually takes it for a ride, and it's just pure joy at this point in the episode. And this scene is just pure joy for me, and this makes the entire episode. And this feels so much like Star Wars, and at the core of Star Wars, it's supposed to be fun. Absolutely. That's what makes Star Wars Star Wars, is it's supposed to be fun. And this is what we get in this moment in Star Wars. We get to see Beggar's Canyon again. Oh my god, when I saw that, it was beautifully rendered too. This looks absolutely phenomenal. All these sequences look so good, and just like the quality of these shots are just above and beyond. And if you noticed, if you had some keen eyes in this episode, you saw a broken fence in Beggar's Canyon that Anakin broke in his pod racer in episode 1. Still broken, by the way. So nobody cared to repair that over a few decades, I guess, but still broken in there. And I thought that was really cool that they actually showed that. And we see Din head off into space, and he eventually gets pulled over by the cops in this episode. And we get to see Captain Carson Teva again, played by Paul Sun-Hwan Lee. And I absolutely love this actor. He's been in a couple episodes of Mandalorian. I'm glad that we get to see him again in season 3. We saw him in the trailer, and so he's coming back. I'm glad he's playing a bigger role in that. So he does a phenomenal job. And the other pilot was actually played by Max Lloyd Jones. And if you didn't know, he is the guy that we actually talked about last episode of The Mandalorian Revisited. And he was the stand-in for Luke Skywalker in Chapter 16, The Rescue. And at this point, I was absolutely sure, watching this episode for the first time, way back when it aired, I was like, Max Lloyd Jones is in this episode. We're definitely getting Luke Skywalker, either in the next episode or the next episode. He's going to show up in the Book of Boba. I was absolutely sure by this point that we're going to get some Luke Skywalker. And I thought for sure it was going to be played by Max Lloyd Jones. So put a pin in that. We'll talk about more of that next week. Din jets off after this, after they let him go. We see that he returns to the hangar and finds Fennec Shand literally dropping in. She drops down in the hangar and tells him that Boba Fett needs his help. And Din tells Fennec that he'll help with no charge. But first, he's got to pay a visit to a little friend. So we're left on that note, knowing that, Din is going to go see Grogu and probably Luke Skywalker himself. So I was super excited at this point to get to see that. And I was like, oh man, this is only getting better and better. I can't believe this. This is awesome. So there you go. There's the end of the episode, end of Return of the Mandalorian, Book of Boba Fett, Chapter 5. So all in all, I absolutely loved this episode. It gave us so much lore. It set up a lot for what we're going to see in Mandalorian Season 3, and it developed our characters and gave us just a ton of fun. I absolutely loved it. So for my rating of this episode, I've got to give this a 9 out of 10. I'm not going to give this a 10 out of 10 because I do have one complaint. Here's my one complaint, guys, for this episode, is that I really didn't think that this needed to be a part of Book of Boba Fett. This should have actually been the first episode of Season 3 of The Mandalorian. Now, there's a lot of talk behind the scenes about why that is and why this happened the way it did in the production and why we got the Book of Boba Fett instead of Mandalorian Season 3. We had the pandemic going on. We had conflicting schedules with The Last of Us, with Pedro Pascal's schedule and stuff like that. So they needed to put something on the screen. So they decided to go with Book of Boba Fett. But we got what we got in that, and we got an amazing episode of The Mandalorian 2.5 in Book of Boba Fett with this episode. So 9 out of 10 for me for this. I very much enjoyed it. And I wonder, I wondered watching this episode, I thought, this was going to be very confusing for people going into Season 3 with all this setup and story that's essential to The Mandalorian being told in another show. So this is one of the main reasons, guys, why I wanted to do The Mandalorian Revisited, was so that I could catch all you guys up on where we're at with The Mandalorian, so that we're all set and ready to go with Season 3, so you won't be confused, so you'll know exactly what's going on, what happened in these episodes, so we can move forward with this. So for any of you that haven't seen the Book of Boba Fett and just wanted to go over this, I'm glad I was able to outline it for you, and we'll be talking more about Book of Boba Fett Chapter 6 next week, From the Desert Comes a Stranger, as well as a little bit of Chapter 7, In the Name of Honor. I'm not going to go over the entire episode of Chapter 7. I'm just going to be focusing on Chapter 6 and a couple of pieces of Chapter 7 that will get us ramped up and ready to go, because next week's our last week without Mandalorian, and the week after that, what do we get? We get Season 3. And so after that, we'll be going live on Wednesdays at 5 p.m. to go over each and every one of the new episodes of The Mandalorian. So I hope you join me for all that. So thanks for joining me today on Fatherly Fandom, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And from our families to yours, have a good one, and may the Force be with you.